All right, everybody, good evening. This is Ethan Evans, the Easy Coach, and above me on the screen you have my longtime colleague Mrugendra, who used to work with me at Amazon. Now he works at a startup we'll talk about in a little bit, and he'll be joining us today to get some help with some of his interests, issues, and areas of development. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about the stream for those of you who are new or joining us for the first time. Most of the time, so first, the Easy Coach, what I normally do is run Q&A sessions where I pick a topic, I talk about it a little bit, and then I answer viewer questions about it. But sometimes, so that you can benefit from the development of others, I do on-stream coaching. And we record a video that ends up on our YouTube channel where you can watch and others can watch over time, and you can get the development you want without having to be on stream like brave Mrugendra here, who has volunteered to come on the show and to share his challenges in his workplace and to join us in learning and developing. The room is very dark today. Okay, thank you for the feedback. We'll crank it up a little. Last time I was too pasty, so we'll see how it goes. One sec. But I appreciate the feedback. There we go. All right. Now I'm a little more Casper the Ghost, as they call me. So you can't win, but I'll try and find a middle ground or keep it a little bit in the middle. Yeah, that's too much. The magic of stage lights. That should be good. Less like a cave and less like Casper the Ghost. Anyway, okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to introduce Mrugendra. You can tell we're going to go over his education and background. We'll talk a little bit about when he and I worked together, but we haven't worked together in years. So I feel like I can be a good coach for him because I have some distance and he has some distance from me. Appreciate the feedback there, 40 Pink Dragons, that we've got it right. So without further ado, though, if you have questions this time, we're not going to do Q&A, but you're free to jump into chat with any comments you want me to share with Mrugendra. He's watching the stream while he talks to us. And if there's anything you want to add in terms of advice, topics I miss, you can plop them in there. And if there's stuff you want us to talk about, you can suggest them. I don't know if we'll get to it. But with that in mind, I completely encourage the audience to add their wisdom simply because though I coach, I am not a perfect coach. And I sometimes share on the stream a quote from Ken Blanchard, who wrote The 1 Minute Manager. And that quote is, "None of us is as smart as all of us. So all of us together make a much better coach than I do alone." So with that in mind, Mrugendra, tell us, introduce yourself and say what you'd like about yourself and why you're here, and then we can talk a little bit about your background and where you're working, stuff like that.
Cool. So Mrugendra here. I have about 14 years of experience working. Started my career after an MBA, engineer plus MBA, in a company called Cognizant. I used to live in the Bay Area for a little over 5 years. Then spent about 7 years with Cognizant. Got hired by Ethan into his team, and in Amazon spent about, I think, 3.5 years, roughly about in that team, which was the App Store team at that point in time. Set up a team in India, scaled it to a couple of other geographies, and then moved on to join the retail bandwagon with Amazon.in launching, where in Amazon.in I was predominantly in supply chain for all the roughly 4 odd years I spent there. Most of that time was leading a bunch of program management functions. Towards the end, I was also leading a couple of supply chain functions alongside supply chain tech. Then decided I wanted to get a little more adventurous in life, so moved on, started hunting for startups, and came across this company called Exact, which is where I am, and I'll talk a bit about what we do. I joined as a chief product officer at Exact, based out of Pune, India, and now I run most of our product and technology and product development, which is based out of India.
And what I'm doing for just a second, for those of you curious, this is the web page. I know it's over my face. I won't leave it up for long. But this is the web page for Exact, where Mrugendra works today. So if you're a little bit curious for context, it's just www.exact, 2x's, at.com. You can get a little context for where he is today. And today you're working as Chief Product Officer, right?
Correct.
And in that role, you own some software development and then all product roadmap.
Yes.
Sweet.
Yes.
All right, got it. So that's like a brief overview. Hey, tell Kyle, it's good to see you. You should hydrate. So, with that in mind, tell us a little bit about what brought you. Why did you, when I put out the coaching contest and I said I'd do multi-month coaching for anyone, I'd select someone. What was on your mind when you asked about it? Like why, you and I have worked together. You've had the benefit of my input before, though it's been like 5 years. Why now? What was on your mind?
Right. So I think two, three areas, right? First was obviously knowing you and having gotten input from you before was a factor. Second, I had seen a lot of the streams before on the Easy Coach, and I sort of liked the informal yet very informative format of the show. So I thought this is something that I could benefit from and I could easily do without feeling like I'm on national television or something like that. So
I think I just got complimented and then slighted. Like he likes me, but it's a very small audience. That's I think what I heard, but that's all right.
All right, no worries. So, and I think the third thing was for me as a professional, this is like right now a transition from sort of being in getting into an executive role from a middle management slash set up for executive kind of a status in Amazon, right? Where I was leading a team, I had a pretty decent size org and scope, but then there was always 5 people above me who would watch out for me, who would guide me, who would keep a watch out, who would give me goals, who would where there would be a lot of top-down structure to moving to a scenario where I'm the one who is driving a lot of the structure. And for context, the CEO of Exact is in North America. So I'm sort of alongside the CTO, the two main leaders in the company in India at this point in time. So that makes the role a little different from anything I've done in the past. And as I was undergoing that transition, I had a bunch of questions, a bunch of doubts about what I'm doing, how I'm doing, what is the right way to do things. And then the message came along from you and Easy Coach to say, hey, we are going to do this. So I thought, why not give it a shot? And there I was sending you a list of my areas which I feel I could get some help on and really use some advice on.
Sweet. Sounds good. So let's see. I just moved your window and I think it changed how you appeared. Yep, sure did. So that was my fault. I put you back how you were. Working with too many displays here. So anyway, sweet. So where would you like to begin? I'm happy to talk to you about anything you want. Usually it begins with a question, like a problem you have that you'd like input on, or, what are you struggling with today?
Okay. So I think there are two. Let me take the top area which I'm trying to figure out. As I make this transition, and as now I've been with Exact for about 4 months, and I'll have to give a bit of context before I get into the question. So Exact has been around in India for about 2.5, 3 years.
Yep.
And over the last, I would say 18 months, we have scaled really exponentially in terms of client growth, where we have almost quadrupled our client base. And for context, our clients are basically universities in North America who buy our SaaS-based products for managing what is called clinical education in programs like nursing or pharmacy or physiotherapy, occupational therapy, so on and so forth. Anything which is allied to the field of medicine as such, but not medicine itself. So as we have quadrupled our client growth, and I have come in, one of the things I've realized, and which I, alongside the CEO, CTO, and all of us are trying to change, is to say, how do we set a more customer backwards and a more ownership driven culture and scale the team in the right fashion? So a lot of our challenges today are more in terms of the core culture, and how do you go about setting a certain kind of culture uh, in in an organization that is new, and especially when you as a new leader are coming in. And for example, if you see instances where you don't have the right level of responsiveness, where you don't have the right level of metrics that are being tracked, and how do you go about setting a very high bar and culture on some of these aspects, would be my first and biggest challenge at this point in time.
So I love this. Thank you. That's a place. So culture and leading change. Let's talk for a second about leading change, and then we'll talk about culture. So everyone knows I love to give one of my things when I coach. One of the things I do is I give the people I'm coaching homework. And since Mrugendra and I will probably only talk once a month, we'll do a live stream once a month, and we have Kristen, who's going to be on the show Thursday, and we'll do a live stream with her once a month. We'll do those two shows, and in between that, I'll expect both of them to put some effort in and try some of the things we lay out as a way of developing. And I didn't know what you wanted to talk about today. I mean, Mrugendra and I talked a little bit about this. And by the way, Mrugendra, when he was in, I always love to tell a funny story. So I'll answer your question. But one of the best stories when he joined my team in India. So you heard Mrugendra say he's got an engineering degree and an MBA. He earned them both in India. And then he had come and worked in the US for several years, and we sent him back in India as a leader. And he built a team that was operational. And he'll know where this story goes. You can watch his face turn in a little bit when he sees where on earth I'm going, because he doesn't know I'm going to tell this story. And I'll let him enhance the story with his version after I tell it, so you can get the straight truth. He started leading this team of hourly folks that were testing applications. We hired people. I actually don't recall. Did we pay them salary or hourly? The L2s and L3s doing app testing.
It was salary, Ethan.
Salary. Okay. So the fun part of this is we had people in testing apps for the Amazon App Store, so Android apps. And as I recall, at the time, their salary, just so those of you who are looking for jobs in the US or in Europe, because I know we have some of our European viewers on, their salary, including, well, their paid salary and then they have benefits on top of this, was equivalent to $8,000 a year. So for all of you who are complaining that you're not making good money, this was killer money in Bangalore. But the fun part of this is Mrugendra had a gathering of folks, and one day he came in and he told me this story because he was upset and said, I have an MBA, what am I doing? And he came in and one of the young ladies who worked for him was crying. And Mrugendra, being a good manager, and he wants to set the culture, right? So this is relevant to what he wants to reflect on right now. He thought, gee, I should go see why this young lady is crying. And he went and spoke to her. I think you may have brought her into your office as you told the story. And she said, as I recall the story, well, yesterday, someone else in the office wore a new dress to the office, and everyone complimented her on her dress. But today, I wore a new dress to the office, and no one has said anything. Is that story roughly right?
Yeah, that's accurate.
Okay. So Mukendra was asking me, like, here I am as a dress counselor and a popularity counselor for my team. This is not what I imagined as the output of my MBA and my 10 years of experience. What do I do? So, with that, I'm going to pop up the web window real quick. I didn't know I'd get to do this so quickly. And it'll be over my face again. Live with it. This is my book list. And I've lost Windows again. Sorry. This is my book list. And the book that's showing here, it's probably small, is the book Switch. And if we actually pop up Switch, Switch is about how to change things when change is hard. So that's the actual. This is one of my favorite books by Chip Heath, and it's actually Chip and Dan Heath. They're brothers. I talk about these books all the time. Many of the people on the stream have read or heard me talk about Decisive. Actually, the first book I read by these authors was the book Switch. And Switch talks about how to lead change. So I'll take this down and won't have it up anymore. I'll get it off over my face. But if you want to know about Switch, that's one thing that we could consider becoming your homework. I don't know if it needs to be your homework, but you can learn about Switch. You can learn about leading change there. So the other thing I want to explain quickly is Mugendra referred to working backwards from customers. And so just so everybody knows, that's an Amazon methodology he learned. It's something Jeff Bezos taught us all. And basically the lesson there is you start with what you're trying to give the customer, and then you write a press release like you're about to announce your new product to the customer. And then you use that to explain what is the real value in whatever it is you're building. And so it's a way of making sure that you're actually focused on what you're doing for the customer when you build products, rather than being focused on whatever else internally. Most commonly, the mistake people make is, how do we make money? And so they're much more focused on how to make money. And it turns out actually focusing on making money is bad. The best way to make money, making money is not bad. The best way to make money is to focus on what the customer needs and then do that. So that works pretty well. So answering your question, Mrugendra, I guess what I need to know next is what is the culture? How would you describe the culture today? What's the starting point? So you want to go to being more customer focused, more working backwards, and you have the good problem to have, which is you have a lot of demand. You have a lot of, it's unusual, but even as a smaller company, you have a lot of people who want your services. How would you describe the culture you're trying to evolve?
So are you saying, how do I describe the culture that I want to build, or
No, where are you starting? Like, I get the idea that you want to go to be more customer focused. What would you say, without being critical of anyone, what is the current, what change are you seeking to make? What is the current thing that you feel could be improved?
Yeah. So I think the current thing, a lot of what the way we work today is a lot of it is very reactive.
Okay.
So, for example, we are undergoing a big overhaul of our versions in the software, and we are building a new version of the product. But as we do that, on most of our customers are live on the older version, and a lot of that, for example, is very reactive. What I mean by that is we figure out issues basis escalations. We figure out issues a lot of times which we could have avoided if we had the right things in place, are basically, we only come to know of them when the customer complains a lot of times.
Okay.
It's not true 100% of the time, but it's true to a degree, to say that a lot of our actions are post fact. The event that should not have occurred has already occurred, and then we are firefighting to scramble and save face, right? And we do it very well most of the times, almost all the time, in fact. So we do a great job of dousing the fires, but these are fires that could have been prevented in the first place. So I think that is one part of it. The second part of it, which is a very unique challenge, I would say, maybe not as unique, but unique to me at least, is that the space we are in is a very specialized space. So, figuring out how do you do clinical education for a nursing program when the students who are trying to learn nursing and who are trying to take that 5 year course to become a nurse, 4 year, 5 year courses to become nurses, are going in and spending a lot of their time in clinics. Now, what they do at the clinic, what they need to do, what are their needs, what kind of software solutions does the university need, does the student need? A lot of that is very domain centric, specialized knowledge. So, how do you differentiate, and how do you, in India, you have a tech team, in the US, you have a smaller product team, but a lot of the knowledge that you need to gain is coming from people who are not as good and who may not understand technology as well as you do, because they are medical practitioners. So a lot of our team, and the people who help us build the software, are actually nurses, physiotherapists, and so on. So how do you build the right process and bridge between them and a set of technology folks, so that you are actually able to listen to the customer and what these folks are telling you? And how do you strike the right balance in that process is the other culture challenge, or process challenge in terms of listening to the customer, that I would say I'm trying to solve.
Uh, so there's a lot going on there. I appreciate you sharing it. And I'll say a couple things for the audience that I found tough when I worked with Mrugendra and the rest of my team in Bangalore. And he reminded me earlier, by the way, even though he said I didn't have to correct it, that he's in Pune now, another Indian city, same time zone, but a little bit further north, and a little bit less of a tech center, although it's one of the two kind of main tech centers, I would say, from my understanding, in India. So there's so many things to tackle there. As further context, though, one of the challenges that's really hard, and I think we can all learn from what Mrugendra is struggling with, is it's strange, but there's an 11 and a half hour time difference between the U.S. West Coast and Bangalore. So there's an 8.5 hour time difference from their headquarters in, I think it's New Jersey, right? Yeah. So Exat is headquartered in New Jersey. And basically, the challenge you have with an 8.5 hour time difference is nobody's ever working at the same time. So by the time one team gets in, the other one's gone. It's a little bit easier in New Jersey because maybe if somebody stays late or somebody gets in a little bit early, you can overlap for an hour or two without too much pain. When Mrugendra and I were working together, it was always like this. So either he would have to get up really early and I would have to talk from my home at night, or vice versa. And that's just like a really hard way. And when you're trying to communicate information, NVA Hitch in chat says, seems like a product management escalation and preserve the scope. One of the challenges is building that customer empathy. So Mrugendra is hiring people who need to implement in India software and services for a US business setting that they've never personally seen or experienced and that they're not directly familiar with. Meanwhile, you have what we would call subject matter experts in the US, the nurses, doctors, physical therapists, etc., who are trying to explain what they need in order to serve the company's customers, but who are not technical in nature. So this is a super hard, in my opinion, this is actually a quite hard communication problem. And I think my first set of advice, okay, working backwards from the customer and writing a press release is a good way potentially to get, to try to capture in written form what is the goal, and to put that in shared language about, it doesn't have to be technical. A press release is never technical. And so you can put down, hey, what are we trying to accomplish in English? Which is another interesting thing. everyone I talk to from India, I find out that English is at least their second language, often their third, fourth, or fifth. And so you have the communication challenge that they're not just working their second language, they're often working in their third or fourth, and you're trying to share ideas back and forth. Um, so, how would I change the culture? How would I go about the change? I think for you to scale yourself as a leader, and everyone can learn from this, you ultimately need. Um, uh, oh, this is really funny. Uh, our chatbot caught somebody's statement because he used the word scope creep, and I think it thought he was calling someone a creep. Sorry, Hitch. I totally get it. Perfectly applicable to scope creep. Um, so yeah, technology. This is actually a good example, right? Technology does what you tell it to, not what you intend it to, and so perfect lesson for everyone. Going back to your question, um, in order to lead to this type of change, I think first you as chief product officer probably need to exemplify it. In other words, you're going to need to teach this and show it. And when you're trying to set up a change process, there's other books I love actually. I talked about Switch. Another book I love here is the book Who Moved My Cheese, a really simple, short book about change. Um, but to change that way, and I see Kristen's here. She's the person, the young woman who will be joining us Thursday evening. She has a comment in chat, which we'll get to in a minute. But in order to, you have to basically show people the change is possible. And so first exemplify it and give them some sense of the benefits. Because if they've never seen it, it's hard to imagine. And the other thing I think you need to connect it to is you described a lot of firefighting and reactivity. It's not clear to me how working backwards from the customer will get you out of that, but you may have a theory about how it will, and you're going to have to explain that to people. My favorite approach to change, I borrow an unpopular saying from a former U.S. politician called a coalition of the willing, and it was a guy named Donald Rumsfeld. Um, and there's awesome Dave showing up. So you wanted to know where Dave Markley was. Mrugendra used to work with Dave Markley, who's awesome Dave plus David in our chat, and one of our moderators, the producer on the show. So he wanted to say hi. Anyway, I think you have to demonstrate it, and I think you should demonstrate it with a team or somebody who's willing to try. So I'd pick out one small project and try to get a win. And the book Switch will talk about this. Can you get a win somewhere? In other words, you don't change. Turns out, and everyone misunderstands this, whether it's me as an executive at Amazon and Twitch, or Mrugendra as an executive at Exat, and me with a big team and him with a smaller team at this point, people have the idea that we can just give orders and they get followed. And nothing can be further than the truth. So if you're ever on a power trip and you think by getting promoted, whether it's to managing one person or 1,000, that you're now going to have a set of obedient followers, turns out people decide on their own what to do, and they only do what they believe in. And so leading change is about getting people to want to change, because forcing them to change kind of went out with the pharaohs and whips. So my first advice on the customer focus is demonstrate it. And I guess I'll pause and ask, do you do a lot? I think you described to me that you have up to 8 separate little product teams. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I would try to figure out, is there one product team that is on board for a change, that has a progressive leader or a excited person to try something, different? Do you think you have 1 or 2 teams that would be good pilots?
Yeah, definitely.
So I would try to get them to pilot things, and then you can have a proof of concept. You can have a proof of uh, applicability, and once you get the snowball rolling, once you show something working, then the other teams will be more likely to adopt it of their free will. This book, Switch, talks about a really interesting thing I'll share with the stream, which is it talks about the elephant and the rider. And the elephant is basically your emotions. It's people's emotions, because emotions power your work. If you're excited about your work, you work harder. If you're scared for your job, you work hard. If you're not very motivated, you don't have much energy, and you tend to wander off course and read Facebook or Reddit or whatever, or watch Twitch. Not that I would ever encourage people to watch Twitch at work. So anyway, unless you work at Twitch, and then you should. But more seriously, the rider is like your will. And the point is, for any short moment, the rider can pull the elephant in the line. But the rider is very small and gets tired very easily. And that's like your self-discipline. And so if the elephant doesn't want to go somewhere and you can't get it onto a new path where it wants to go, it won't. It'll just overpower the rider and go back, and the rider will be exhausted. So in your case, you're the rider. The boss is the rider. Like, very short term, if you're standing over someone, you could say, come to this meeting and hear about this technique and write this document. But if they don't get any value out of it, they'll stop as soon as you go somewhere else. And so this is all about getting them to see the value. And then when you're gone, they'll be like, this path is way easier, right? The rider can go to sleep or relax, but the elephant wants to go down the trail, and then you're fine. So that's my first set of advice, which is really consider a pilot project. What questions do you have, or what do you think about that? Do you think that'll work for you, or something else instead?
So I think that's a good suggestion in terms of basically saying pick something out and walk the path you want everybody else to walk with it, and see if that sort of, when it works out, if it motivates, or if it shows up as a good example for 7 other teams or 6 other teams or whatever it is to essentially emulate, is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. So someone in chat asked, Eric Lay 88 asked, do you prefer being called Easy Coach or Ethan? I don't care. I'm not hung up on people only using my channel name. There were a lot of Ethans already, and only one Easy Coach. The background of the name, by the way, is my middle initial is Z, and so Ethan Z made me Easy Coach. And it was like a nice double entendre, of course, with the fact that I wanted coaching to be easy. Like, you don't have to come somewhere and go to an office and pay someone. You could instead just listen to me on Twitch. So it's a double win, and that's why I go by the Easy Coach. But you can feel free to address me as either one. So Chad also says, kind of on his question, do you bring this idea up with a team, the manager, or the group before the manager? Yeah, good question. I would talk to the manager first, because if the manager's not bought in, like, going around your management chain, like, so Mrugendra has some people who work for him, and then they have teams, is the basic structure. Going around your manager is a really bad idea. It undermines them. It makes them mad or upset or scared. Good to see you here, T Weirdo, by the way. You've got to go through the chain of command, and if you find yourself needing to go around your manager, it means you have a manager that you can't work with. Now, that doesn't mean you never talk directly to employees, but you never give them, you never give direction to people on a team without going through the manager, having the manager on board. The one exception I make, and I see Mrugendra nodding, I think he agrees with this, is in an emergency. If there's some emergency, like an outage, then you need to, all bets are off, because it's all hands and you're organizing. But otherwise, that's what you do. So cool.
So a question, Ethan, on
Yeah,
that.
please.
If I may. Yeah. So one situation where I agree with you, and I completely agree, not bypassing the manager ever and getting them on board before you do any change, or for that matter any communication uh, with the team. One situation is where there is a exigency and you just need all hands on deck, and you can't wait for to get hold of the manager for 2 hours or 4 hours or whatever that period of time might be, because it needs to happen now and in the next few minutes or hours. There is another situation, and I would just love to hear from you as to, is that a valid situation
Yeah, go ahead.
in in certain cases when you are trying to drive home a point with a large group of people, and you want to drive home a certain point about how we have to look at a customer situation, how we have to demonstrate more urgency, more empathy, whatever it is, right? Without going into too much detail. But let's say somebody is setting a wrong example as a team of how to deal with that situation, and you want all the other teams to know that this is not the right way to deal with such a situation. There is a better approach. How do you go about doing that in a group? Do you like send a message uh, to the entire set of employees, or do you send a message to managers and expect them to drive the change? How do you drive, because that's for me a struggle in terms of driving change and culture, to say there are certain things we cannot do, and if there is a set of people who are doing it and you need to stop that, you want, or you need to coach them that this is not the right way to deal with it, but you want that message to go to the other uh, group of people who may not have done the same thing, but so that they learn from it. How do you drive something like that?
Yeah, so this is a really hard problem because uh, rephrasing your question, you want to um, uh, guide people on how to uh, behave, but there's a very good rule that says praise in public, criticize in private. And so when
Yep.
you're trying to correct a behavior, if you single some people out and say, hey, everybody, don't do what this person did, right? They're going to be very humiliated, usually. Unless they agree or they understand, or you have a really uh, good way to do that, that's going to be really hard. And so, one way to do it is to depersonalize it and try to explain it as a policy, but don't call out the people. You have to explain why you want to do something differently and turn it into like an explanation from the customer viewpoint to your point of customer backwards. You don't talk about what was done wrong. You basically have to talk more about what is right. Now, this doesn't, in my opinion, apply. Uh, Hitch, you just have a huge way of finding things that hit the auto mod. So he had another message block because he said, "Oh shit." So we have the potty mouth filter tightened down pretty far. Anyway, let's see. Going back to the point, this is a really hard thing to do, and I'm glad you asked the question. I tell everyone I like really hard questions because they make me think, and yours is really hard. So bonus points for you. First hard question of the night, because you have me working to make up my answer on the fly. Uh, don't humiliate people in person. With a team your size, I would consider talking to people one at a time because your team is not that large. That you couldn't do that. But if you have to scale it, I would talk about the positive message.
So my entire org is about 60 odd people at this point in time,
Yeah,
tech plus product. So
yeah,
I think talking to everyone one on one would be super hard, and it
yeah.
would take weeks.
And so you can do it in small groups, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
is an option. And if you have to send it as an email, I would not. The worst thing I would do in a situation like that, the emails I say, is they say something like, last week we had an incident where blah, blah, blah happened. We need to handle incidents like that differently. Here's why. Here's what we want to do. But the way I've explained that, you never call out and say, like, Fred and Sarah did X wrong, and I want everyone to learn. I do think as the boss, you're allowed to set standards. Like, people expect that. And also, what's really important here is, do most people understand that it was bad, or can you get them to understand it was bad, or will they disagree with you? I think if they're going to disagree with you, like if they're going to say, well, why is that? That seems like that was good. And you do have situations where people honestly believe they're doing something good when you feel they're not. That you have to interact. The thing about emails is the wound they leave, you have no chance to nuance if it's misunderstood. And people will pull out that email. You can try this. People will pull out their email. You can do it with an email you've gotten. You may even have one from me that you felt was unjustly critical. You can pull out an email from 5 years ago and it will still piss you off. And so the danger is, if you write something, it can irritate people over and over. So I'm not afraid to write things, by the way. I just did something with my team over the weekend. This is a funny story, real quick, gives you an idea of what I did and how I was trying to balance this. My team, one of my team members sent me a request to approve something, a new contract or a new deal. He sent me the request at 5:32 p.m. in our time zone on Friday, and said we needed a decision by 10 a.m. Monday. And I felt this was super unreasonable. And I started asking him why. But the point is, there were a few people on the thread. And the first thing I did was cut the thread down. And the second thing I did, so I wouldn't embarrass him, I put him with as few people as possible. And the second thing is, I was very supportive. I said, I'm super happy that we have this opportunity. I want to go forward with it, but I'm missing some information we need. You're telling me we have to decide by 10 a.m. Monday. That seems unreasonable. I don't believe that. Can we get more time? And so I was coaching him through, we need to be able to, I explained all the things. And then I did set out, though, I said, I won't do business this way. I made it about me, not about him. I need appropriate information and appropriate time. And so can you design a process to get us the information in the right time? And I see the chat's really going here. So I see Mrugendra's been reading some of it. I'll take a second and read it. And Mrugendra, if there's anything in chat you want to call out that you find interesting or have questions of the people there, go right ahead while I catch up and read. It never hurts to communicate these things to other team leads and managers as well. I agree. They might have additional context. That's a good point. Your team managers know their people better. If you pass the message to them and have them pass it down, they have more trust and are closer. Plus, David says, I like to call out good behavior in public. That encourages people to emulate. Yes, I completely agree with that. You always want to reinforce those things publicly. It's when you do have to, stream something, or when you do have to call out something negative, you try to do it in the least damaging way. Kristen says, building relationships will go a long way. So this is a lesson I recently learned the hard way. I think I've told people here, I have my own coach. So just as I coach you guys and try and share what I know, I have a coach at work. And I'm very results oriented. I was sharing this story earlier today. And I'm one of those people who's focused on the goal. And I can lose track of the fact that other people who may not share my goal, when I'm goal oriented, they feel run over. And what I've had to learn is that building relationships with people is an investment in their productivity. So both building relationships with your managers, because you can't build relationships with 60 people on your team, and building a relationship with uh, having your managers, encouraging them to build real relationships with their team members will give them the trust. Because if you think about this, I talk about this all the time. This is a good example, but Mrugendra may have not heard it from me. And I want everyone else on the stream to know. I use this thought experiment. If you think of someone you don't like, yeah, Dorino has heard me talk about this. He says Ethan the Tank. And yes, I do have this personality from a book called Working with People You Can't Stand called The Tank. If you think about someone you don't like and they come and ask you for something really simple, like, hey, could you get me a glass of water? Or do you have a glass of water? Could I have a drink? And you don't like them, even though you may have all the water and all the cups in the world, part of you is like, screw you. Meanwhile, if you're really close to someone and they're a good friend of yours and they come to you and say, I'm in trouble, do you think you could loan me $10,000 and come to my house and help me take a package I have wrapped in carpet out into the desert and get rid of it? You think about it like, yeah, I could probably do that. And so this is the point about relationship. When you build that relationship, people trust you. So I've gone on about this for a while. Did that answer your question, or do you have follow-up questions? Because it's a good question.
No, I think it answers my question. The only follow-up question I would have, or thought process I would have, is my take on some of these things is I completely buy the philosophy of never criticizing in public. I get it. The challenge with a startup, though, is a little bit different, which is that if you're in a larger company, you have 6 months to go a little slower and be a little more patient to see the change you want to change. In the life of a startup, 6 months is like 2 or 3 years in the life of a large company. So you need the change to happen in 60 days and not 6 months a lot of times. So does that change context and change the way you have to approach some of these aspects?
It can. And it's a good point. First, even large companies want to change quickly, because large companies, I have a small team, I want them to fix things right away. Here's how you do it. Number one, before you have a problem, you tell your team how you're going to handle problems. So it turns out people can accept things if their expectations have been set. So if you talk to your teams and have a meeting with your teams where you say, hey, when there are problems, I'm sometimes going to share that there was a problem with everyone and talk about the solution. And when I do that, it's not my intention to embarrass or criticize anyone. It's just we have to get the word on new behavior out fast. And you give preconditioning. And that way, when it happens, you remind them and say, remember, you can even like pick the date, or you throw a party, or you do something to make it memorable. And you say, remember the day we all had cupcakes and I said, we're going to talk about Cupcake Day in the future, and I'm going to remind you that when we have a problem, because we're a startup and we have to move quickly, I'm going to share it publicly, and it's not to embarrass anyone, it's only to improve. Well, today we're going to talk about Cupcake Day because blah, blah, blah happened, and people were honestly doing their best, but it didn't work out for our customer, and so we need to change behavior, and we need to do it quickly. So it's a matter of pre-setting expectations, because people can handle almost anything if you tell them to expect it, and that works really well. And there's a question in here, by the way, about in chat about building stronger relationships on remote teams. I'll address that real quickly because you do have remote teams, and I'm assuming you don't feel you have your money to fly everyone everywhere.
No.
Number one, though, is FaceTime. I think I went to, when I worked with Mrugendra in Bangalore, I went to Bangalore once every 6 months for a week, which I could have done more, I could have done less, but I think FaceTime matters. A good thing is video technology has gotten so much better. So don't do an email what you can do by voice. Don't do in voice what you can do by video. because so much of our communication is visual and so much of our communication is body posture and intonation. And so try and get out of that. That's one recommendation with remote teams is be as little remote as you can. The second thing is do try and understand other cultures. So it happens that I really am fascinated by other cultures. And so when I worked in India and I worked in China, I tried to learn a lot about the culture. So like long before I started working with Mrugendra, I had a map of India from working for years with other Indian employees. And I learned where basic places were and different religions and different languages. And so I can relate to Mrugendra and others about what their native tongue is and where they went to school. And those kinds of things show an interest in people. So basically, many of you have heard this from me before. It's the book I talk about the most. I talk about the book Leadership and Self-Deception. And what Leadership and Self-Deception says is it's important to talk to people like they're people, not like they're objects you're trying to manipulate. And that's actually the same thing with my cupcake example. If you need to move fast, by telling people why you're doing something and setting their expectations up front, you're preloading with them the idea that they're people and you care about their feelings, but sometimes business requires that you act quickly. And so please don't be upset. And that kind of expectation setting can help people feel like they're treated as humans. Because again, we've all had the experience when we're talking to someone and you decide, she's just trying to manipulate me. She just wants me to work the weekend to get this project done, and she doesn't really care about my family or the fact I worked last weekend. And now it doesn't matter how good the reasons are, you're not listening. Comparatively, if someone is treating you like a person and saying, look, we have this problem with a customer, I know you've worked several weekends, how can we solve it? I don't want to put you out, but at the same time, we have a goal. What would work? And you invite them in. You're treating them like a person and you're solving the problem together. So a lot of comments here in chat. Again, I love it. We do have a lot better tools. Kristen says use Slack and the Glyphy plugin, different ways to have emotes. Because she, I guess, works with remote teams. She told me when I was talking to her that to get ready for her stream that she uses Slack a lot. I want to reflect on yesterday's stream. For those of you who were there, I was talking about job search, and someone made the snarky comment I didn't respond to. It might have been you, Dorino, actually. Maybe you didn't mean it to be snarky. But you made the comment, my answer to everything was networking. And networking is not what I was trying to say. That networking is the only answer to how to job search, and I probably overemphasized it. Where was I going with this? Oh, but when you're leading people, building relationships is like steps 1, 2, and 3. Because if you have trust, people will work hard for you, and if you don't have trust, kind of doesn't matter what you do. Because if you just think about working for a boss that you distrust or that you don't like, how far you're going to go, the extra mile quickly becomes an extra inch. And Drino, it was okay. You were calling me out on the value of networking is fantastic, like Shadow here says in chat. But I was overemphasizing it. There's a bunch of other steps, and I should have laid them out better. So the number one step for job search, and we'll get back to you in a second, Mrugendra. The number one step for job search is have valuable skills. Have something to sell. The number 2 step in order is make a great resume. And I wasn't a resume that shows your skills. And I wasn't talking about that because it seemed like most of the questions were about, oh, I've got the skills and I've got the resume. How do I get the interview? And that's about networking. Anyway, did I answer your question? I think you nodded a few times, Mrugendra. So I think the idea of pre-selling to your team made a lot of sense to you because I saw you nod. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we're getting towards the end. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and to be honest and just call it out, right? I did that, but I did that simultaneously. So the reason I'm asking you this question is I made a what was for me a really hard choice, because I've never done it in my career so far, was to call something out in to my entire team as this is not okay. I did it in a very polite fashion, leading with a question saying, "Do we believe, etc., etc., that we could have done this differently, or in a form like that, versus versus openly sort of saying this is not okay." And I simultaneously sent out a message to the key few leaders who I thought did not do the right thing. But I get it that doing the messaging earlier and then waiting a day more or 24 hours more to do the public call out, even if it were very polite, would have been the right way to go.
Yep. And even better is do it 3 months in advance. Or the
Right.
point being, set your
Get it.
team's expectation. You were talking in the beginning about cultural change. Part of cultural change is talking to people about what kind of culture your company is going to have. And so you can say, one of the types of culture we're going to have is we're going to have a learning culture. We're going to have a culture where we're willing to learn from things that don't go right. And that means sometimes when things don't go right, I'm going to talk about them publicly. And that's not to embarrass anyone, it's so we can all learn. And you see, in the abstract, no one is thinking, oh, well, I don't want a learning culture. Like, I don't want that. That sounds bad. A culture that learns, I got to get the hell out of here. Or if that's what they think, you want them to leave anyway. And I'm sure in a professional company, a startup, that isn't what people think. So then when you follow that, you've got to, when you come back to it and you say, I said we're a learning culture, well, here's how we're going to, this is a learning moment, right? We have a learning culture, now we have a learning moment, and this is what happened, and everybody was doing their best, but here's the consequence and what we need to do differently. You frame it as learning. Um, Now there are some things that are important, and they come from that book, Leadership and Self-Deception. If you say that honestly and you mean it, everyone will work with you. If you're actually secretly pissed and you're like, look angry, no one will hear that you say it's a learning moment. They'll hear, the boss is pissed and somebody's going to get reamed. And well, it really matters. I've learned so much that you can't actually hide your emotions. Most people can't. And so if you're angry, it's going to come through angry. And I don't know as you were angry, but you might have been frustrated or tired. Coaching people when you're in a bad mood or trying to give feedback when you're not calm, usually a disaster. Uh, so we're getting near the end of an hour. I was going to keep these shows to kind of an hour. Um, a few things I want to run by you for possible homework between now and the next time. I think I've got you sold on this one, so we'll start with a really easy piece of homework. What do you think about maybe 2 weeks from now? Give some distance from this incident. The next time you have a team meeting, talk to the team about having a learning culture. Does that sound like good expectation setting that you could do?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So that's one thing. I'd love to see you have that conversation with your team and set a learning culture. The second thing I'd like to see you do is pick a place to pilot working backwards in your org. Maybe you want to do it in all your teams. That's you're in a hurry as a startup, but pick at least one place. And next time you're here, if we remember, let's talk about your pilot project.
Sure.
And the third thing I would suggest, I don't know, let me ask a question, not prescribe. Besides listening to me, thank you, I appreciate it. How do you best learn? What is your favorite way to learn new skills?
That's a that was one of my questions in the 5 or 6 questions I sent out to you. And my favorite way, or the way I have learned the most things in my career, is from my managers and from my peers.
Okay.
My way of learning is more on the job, observe other people, understand how they deal with a similar situation or a similar way that you have encountered, and learn from that, and also learn by reflecting on what mistakes you have made as a leader yourself.
Okay.
Uh, and one of my questions to you was, in a larger setup like an Amazon, or for that matter even a Cognizant, you have a lot of peers irrespective of where you are. You have a lot of seniors who you can emulate, who you can learn from. In the role now I am in, there's there is very few, right?
Yes.
It's fewer
And you
number
did.
of
I
people.
remember you mentioning this.
Yeah. So for somebody whose primary source of learning is on the job learning through experiences and through the mechanisms I just described, how do you make sure you're still learning? But I think that's going to be a separate discussion, is my guess. But I hope I answered your question.
You did. And that's a good question to bring up next time. We can make that the topic of another show.
Sure.
But I want to point out to everyone a place I almost screwed up. I was like this close. One of my ways of learning is books. So I was going to suggest to Mrugendra pick a book to read. But that's not his learning language. So he might read a book if I ask him to, and he might not. But cramming my methods down his situation is not the right way to coach, and it's not the right way to lead others. And this is really important as you try to lead your team through change. You want to be mindful that they don't necessarily learn or lead the way you do, and you have to give them the tools to lead change their way. I see, by the way, Dorino has this suggestion: meeting with peers could be a good way. One thing you can do is get coaching, not coaching, but Pune has a big startup community. You could try to find a peer discussion group. In other words, here in the US anyway, I know there's lots of organizations for leaders where they can get together and basically have what amounts to a support group or a mutual learning group. Hephaestus, say a little more. What's a mastermind group? This is in chat. Anyway, you can try that. Get some local people you can bounce things off of. And yeah, he says 5 to 7 people in similar roles meeting monthly. So it turns out my advice about networking, it's network at the other startup founders in town. Because I have some people who've gone to those, and they don't have to be in your industry. Most of your problems are people and behavior problems, and you can find, you don't need someone who's doing exactly what you're doing to solve people and behavior problems. Here, a couple of people, someone unpronounceable says Decisive actually gives some great advice in finding people outside your exact environment who've solved your problems. I agree with that. So you can look for parallel problems in other industries. Easy Coach, I have researched that you learn better when you're not taught in your preferred learning style. Thoughts? Kyle, we're going to have to dig into that sometime. Maybe hit me up in Discord with that question. I've never heard that before, but it'd be interesting. Like, link me the research over in Discord. And Eric Lay, these mastermind ideas sounds great. I've never done that, but I've seen equivalent things. The one parting thought I'll leave you with, I won't give you another homework assignment other than maybe consider meeting others. Just do the 2 things I ask. And then consider finding a peer. The last thing I would say I wanted to catch up with you on is you wanted to change things more quickly in a startup. And we talked about how to set your people up to be ready for change. It's about a culture of, we're a startup, we have to move fast and break some eggs. But the change is about what's called managing the heat. And so there's this dynamic where you need to turn the heat on a situation up to break things free and get it to start to change. And that's to get people basically out of their comfort zone, because whatever they're doing today is what they're comfortable with. And so they're doing what's comfortable. You want them to change, you've got to make them uncomfortable, but not so uncomfortable that they resist. And so the theory of change management is all about turning up the heat to get change started, and then turning down the heat and up the hugging, lovey comfort to give people confidence to see the change through. And then you get them to a new comfort zone. There isn't a perfect recipe for this. It involves being in tune with your team. But if it's a startup, what you're basically saying is, out of desperation, no money, panic, need to serve the customers, you want to move more quickly. You can try to rush that process or hurry it, but you have to be cognizant. You can crank the heat up and keep it higher than you might in a larger company with more patience. But when you do that, you're burning trust, which shit happens. You can do that a little bit, but then you can't push it to where you start getting resistance. And when you start getting people resisting what you're suggesting, you know you're going too fast. So like with this working backwards from the customer, if people start saying, I don't believe in that, or I think it's a waste, or really start digging in, and that's where you learn you're going too fast and you're just going to have to be patient. And so this isn't perfect advice, but I wanted to leave you with that directionally. We have somebody new in chat I haven't seen. We're going to call you Gibbero, Gibber Zero. Anyway, I think what Kyle's research is probably getting to is that if you use an unpreferred style, you'll be forced to focus more on the problem. It could be, whereas a preferred style may make it easier to lose attention or loosen attention. I think that's true. When I do have to go through training in a way I don't like, it's more memorable at the cost of more emotional energy. And that's something you have to manage very carefully. Like Mrugendra shared with me, he has 2 other people advising him, not just me. Now they're in different fields, they're not coaches, and they're not in the same roles. But taking advice from 3 people, plus trying to do his job, is probably pretty demanding. And so one of the things that's tricky is you have to manage your own emotional energy in order to be able to learn and improve. Exhausted people, scared people, maybe a concept we'll do a whole show on sometime is the concept of SCARF. SCARF is an acronym. I don't remember what it is. Somebody can Google it and put it in chat. But SCARF is basically 5 different factors that kill learning and productivity. They're the things that ruin what's called psychological safety. And basically, if you don't feel psychologically secure in your job, you can't learn or perform. You go into protecting yourself emotionally. And so with change management, everything I've said is about avoiding creating this scarf. And I'll bring it up here in a minute if it doesn't show up from a helpful chat person. But SCARF is basically 5 different fear factors, where I think the F is actually fear. There we go, SCARF. Thank you, Kyle. Status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Those are the 5 things you have to feel secure in your workplace to do your best work. You don't have to be high status. It doesn't mean that, but it means you need to know your status and not feel that your status is threatened. So for example, earlier we talked about people going around managers. That threatens the manager's status. And now the manager is no longer interested in what you're trying to do. They're worried about where they stand. And their whole mind is on, oh my God, why did he go around me? Doesn't he trust me? Did I do something wrong? Have I fallen out of favor? And they're useless. And you've made them useless in one easy step. Certainty is a related concept about feeling like your workplace is predictable. Autonomy means not that you can do whatever you want, but on the work in your area, you're not being micromanaged. Because again, as soon as you get micromanaged, you feel like, oh, I'm not trusted. I must be failing. I must be doing something wrong. I hate this. I don't have any creative freedom. And people shut down. relatedness, we talked about building relationships, and then fairness is doesn't mean the work isn't hard. It can be brutally hard. We're big fans here of the book Extreme Ownership, which is about the Navy SEALs and how brutal their work environment is. But it's fair. It's you do your work and you get your benefits and you're doing it for a reason. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Mukendra, it's fantastic to see you. I'm glad Awesome Dave was able to pop in and say hello. I
Yep.
appreciate everybody who came through tonight. Mukendra will be back in August. Meanwhile, on Thursday, we'll have Kristen, who's been here in chat with us. We'll have Kristen on to do the same thing. Kristen's based in Ohio, where it's a little bit after midnight. You'll meet her tomorrow. And then my next Q&A show will be on August 15th. I'm actually really excited about that show because I'm going to talk about overcoming mistakes and setbacks. I'm going to share some things I've screwed up. And I have a bunch of people in chat who know me. And so they'll remind me of anything I screwed up that I don't remember or I don't mention. And Shadow's already popped up all the links over the course of the show to follow us here. I was super amazed to see when I got on today that the Twitch channel has over 1,200 followers. That's amazing. YouTube, I think, is somewhere well over 200 now on our voyage to 1,000. We're growing on all channels. I will share with the audience a fun fact. While I was streaming yesterday, some of my peers inside Twitch were having a Slack conversation about my stream and how they were surprised how much it was growing. And they thought we were doing a good job as a community and they liked the content. So I thought that was really funny that there was like a back channel commentary inside Twitch about one of the people from Twitch streaming. So anyway, as a community, you guys are great. I appreciate all the people who come here regularly. I appreciate how you go out and share the stream and tell other people about it because we're growing. And it's really funny because the people in Twitch who maybe thought, oh, this is funny, we're going to have an old dude talk about not games on a gaming site. Let's see how that works out. Now they're watching it grow and they're like positively happy for us. So this community is killing it. Mrugendra, thank you so much. It's good to see you. By the way, Mrugendra in his job travels to the US sometimes. So he's probably going to appear with us live in Awesome Dave's studio sometime, maybe February you were saying? Is your next
We could
trip?
no, I'm there in September end, but that's going to
That
be
doesn't
difficult.
line up, yeah.
It doesn't line up, so probably late, closer to the December, January timeframe.
All right.
I try to make it there every 3 months.
All right. Well, when you're here next, we're going to bring him out and have him live. Plus, David, Awesome Dave will host him, and we'll have a good time. All right. So with that, I'm going to sign off, and everyone have a great weekend. Great weekend. What am I saying? Great rest of your week. And I will see you all here Thursday at 8 Pacific. And Mrugendra, stay in touch. If you have questions, hit me up.
Yep, I'll do the homework, and thank you to the folks in chat.
All right. Bye,
for all the
everybody.
nice advice. Bye.